democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Hi, Amy. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, the ransom. That's the name of a major series of articles published by the New York Times detailing how Haiti became one of the poorest countries in the world, while bankers in France and the United States made a fortune. The story dates back to the early 19th century. In 1804, the enslaved people of Haiti rose up, leading a rebellion against French colonial rule, founding the world's first black republic. Under military threat from France in 1825, Haiti agreed to pay reparations to France for lost so-called property, including enslaved people that French owners lost in the rebellion. France threatened to invade Haiti and reimpose slavery if Haiti did not agree to a staggering amount in reparations, 150 million francs, 30 times Haiti's annual revenue. Haiti began taking out loans from French banks, leading to an economic crisis that continues through to this day. The New York Times estimates Haiti paid the equivalent of what's now $560 million to France over the next 7 decades. The true economic cost to Haiti is estimated to be an astounding $115 billion. And that only tells a part of the story. In 1880, a French bank established Haiti's first national bank, essentially putting France in control of Haiti's treasury. That bank, Crédit Industriel et Commercial, used some of its massive profits to help finance the Eiffel Tower. The bank's current owner has just launched an investigation into its dealings with Haiti and its role in what's called the ecosystem of colonialism, that bank, CIC. The Times series also looks at the U.S. military occupation of Haiti that lasted from 1915 to 1934. A key backer of the U.S. occupation was the National City Bank of New York, the predecessor of Citibank. Former U.S. diplomat Patrick Gaspard, who now heads the Center for American Progress, has called on Citigroup to pay reparations to Haiti. Gaspard wrote on Twitter, "A silent scream has been in throats for decades about the role U.S. played in depleting Haiti. No one would listen. Finally, some truths," he said. Over the years, Haitian demands for reparations have been repeatedly shut down, sometimes with force. France's former ambassador to Haiti, Thierry Boucard, admitted to the New York Times that France and the United States effectively orchestrated the 2004 coup that ousted Haiti's first democratically elected president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. Boucard said one benefit of the coup was that it ended Aristide's campaign demanding France pay financial reparations to Haiti. To talk more about Haiti and the devastating impact of colonialism in this massive series in the New York Times, we're joined by 2 guests. Weston Lee Alsanat is a Haitian-American professor at Fordham University, where he teaches courses on the Atlantic slave trade, the American abolition movement, and Afro-Caribbean history. Gerald Horne also joins us. He's professor of history and African-American studies at the University of Houston, author of many books, including Confronting Black Jacobins, the U.S., the Haitian Revolution, and the Origins of the Dominican Republic. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Professor Alsanat, let's begin with you. So this series has come out in the New York Times to both criticism and praise. It's come out in both Creole and in English. That's a first for the New York Times. Can you explain the significance of what many are calling revelations, at least to the general public, but certainly people in Haiti have been alleging for centuries, not only alleging, but of course having proof of this?
Yes, thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me today. I'm glad to be here in conversation with you. So first, let me start by saying that a great acknowledgement to the many reporters and producers who put this very special issue together, and to have given it a front time exposure. It will mean a lot. Not really for Haitians per se, because the facts that are being revealed throughout the report are very well known, even to the most illiterate Haitian, and even to the youngest Haitian growing up. In fact, given the level of underdevelopment that is prevalent in Haiti today, one knows, at least the Haitian people knows, that this could have only been the legacy of an external force, rather of their own making. So I think the significance of the piece will be that it exposes the rest of the world to a knowledge that actually has existed for over 100 years and shares multiple partners, both in the private sector with regards to the financial industry, as well as the United States government, Germany, Great Britain, and most certainly and most influential France, having played a role in imposing the debt that in many ways will explain Haiti's poverty today. So I welcome the piece. I think it's great in terms of the many research that it brought together, both from academic literature that had already existed, as well as new revelations that are coming up. But in terms of calling it revelations, that would be a misnomer. I myself have written very extensively on the subject. Many other fellow academics, historians have written about it. There have been movements over the decades to get the United States, France, and the other parties responsible for this to get them to some accountability. And I believe a large reason why this never got the fair sort of ear of listening that it should have gotten is because it's coming from Haitians, who many people view as sort of the Africans of the Western Hemisphere, but which is an identity that Haitians proudly wear proudly for reasons that reasonably make sense for it in terms of the freedom that they fought and established for all Black people.
Yeah, I'd like to bring in Professor Gerald Horne to the conversation, another historian who has covered the issue of colonialism, imperialism, and slavery throughout the Americas for decades. I too had the same feeling that a lot of this is only new to people who haven't paid attention to the history of the Western Hemisphere over the last several hundred years. I'm wondering your reaction to the piece, because the Times really is delving into history much more than news. I think the most interesting aspect of it was the particular individuals in France and the institutions that directly benefited from the ransom that Haiti was forced to pay. But largely, this is history that is known by people who know any part of the history of Latin America and of the Western Hemisphere. So I'm wondering your reaction to the piece as a historian who studied this carefully.
Well, first of all, I would urge and encourage the New York Times to follow through with their point that they have uncovered new documents by putting these documents online so that other historians can take advantage of their excavations, and or secondly, placing them at the New York Times archive, which I believe has been cited at the New York Public Library. But I think that the story also is of significance and of moment for us in the United States, for we in the United States, because there has been this myth that has been created that the United States and the Haitian Revolution were twins, even though we know, as I begin my book on the Haitian Revolution, George Washington, the founding father of this country, was quite nervous about the eruption in Haiti in August 1791. And this was understandable because the Haitian Revolution, culminating in 1804, led to a general crisis of the entire slave system in the Americas that could only be resolved with its collapse. Therefore, the United States was probably second to France in being an antagonist of the Haitian people. From their point of view, this was a reaction to the fact that many of the slave revolts in the United States had Haitian fingerprints all over them. I'm speaking of Gabriel's Revolt in Virginia in 1800, the Revolt in Louisiana circa 1811, Denmark Vesey about a decade later in South Carolina. In fact, Vesey had sailed in and out of Haiti before that eruption in Charleston, South Carolina. And then, culminating this hostility to Haiti, there is substantial evidence to suggest that when the island that we refer to as Hispaniola, was split in 1844 with the secession from Haiti of what became the Dominican Republic, that this was an early success for U.S. covert operations. So this story in the New York Times is of significance for we in the United States. Hopefully, it will cause us to re-examine the history of this country and move away from the propaganda point that somehow the United States was an abolitionist republic when actually it was the foremost slaveholders republic.
Very special issue together, and to have given it a front time exposure, it will mean a lot. Not really for Haitians per se, because the facts that are being revealed throughout the report are very well known, even to the most illiterate Haitian